So, if you had to pick one word to describe your entire divorce experience, what would it be? For me, it would have to be unexpected. The reality of divorce was quite different than what I ever would have anticipated. And that started at the very beginning. I expected that I would never get divorced. So I thought I knew quite a bit about relationships, both from watching my parents split when I was a kid and from the wisdom imparted to me from my mom, who happens to be a marriage and family therapist. And I thought that my ex husband and I had a relationship where we would work things out. And the reality was something completely different. And I learned that divorce can happen to anybody. It's one of those cruel truths that it takes two people to make a marriage work and only one to decide that it needs to end. So the reality is divorce can happen to anybody. This next expectation isn't one that I personally experienced, but I hear from a lot of people that have. There's sometimes when people are the initiators of the divorce, they expect that it's not going to impact them too much emotionally because it's something that they decided needed to happen. And then they contact me, weeks or months into the process when they're really grieving the loss of their marriage and they're surprised by that fact. The reality is, even if you want the divorce, even if it's something that in some ways you're looking forward to, it's still a loss, and the emotional impact is still going to be pretty big. This next one I have experienced all too well. For those that have been on the other side, who've been blindsided by a sudden divorce, the expectation is often that it's going to be impossible for them to recover from something so dramatic and so traumatic. And they can't ever imagine loving again, trusting again, much less moving on. And the reality is that it is something you can recover from. I'm not going to say that you get over it. I hate that phrase. But you are able to move through it and learn from it and continue on. It doesn't have to be something that continually defines you. One of the more common expectations with divorce is that the courts are going to provide justice. Maybe this has to do with your ex behaving badly and you think that the courts are going to somehow punish them, or when it comes to child custody, that they're going to recognize what would be quote unquote fair in your situation and ensure that that happens. And unfortunately, the reality is that the courts don't really care about you or about your situation. And they also have limited time and limited resources to really try to understand the particular dynamics in your family. And so if you're looking for some sort of resolution, it's not where it's going to come from. And a related expectation is thinking that the decree, once you have that decree in hand, that everything's going to be okay. I definitely fell for that expectation. I was waiting for that date. It was like, okay, once I'm there, it's done, closed, I can put it behind me. And it kind of surprised me when the morning after the divorce was final, I woke up and I felt exactly the same. There wasn't some magic in that decree, unfortunately. Another expectation that I had that's a pretty common one is I didn't think that divorce could get ugly. My ex and I always had what I thought was a good relationship, and it definitely was a respectful one as far as on the surface, I guess. But, we would listen to each other. We would, disagree respectfully. We didn't fight dirty or any of that. And both were pretty rational, reasonable people. So I figured divorce would continue along those same lines. Well, he sort of shattered that at the beginning with the way he decided to end it. But then the behavior became even more irrational on his part and unfortunately even on mine. It's hard to know how you're going to respond until you're in it. And it's such a scary place and such an emotional place that I don't think anybody goes through divorce without making at least some bad decisions, because you're being driven by emotions at that point. And I think at some point it's going to get ugly somehow, some way, even if you don't intend for it to. And then finally, one of the other expectations, I didn't expect there to be any stigma about being divorced. In this day and age, it's a pretty common experience. But yet, I noticed that when somebody found out that I had been married previously or that I was currently going through a divorce, there was kind of this little shield that would come down over their face, and they started to, reach some conclusions about me, even judgment. And it's weird because even today I'll find sometimes when I'm in conversations with people that don't know me, don't know my past, don't know my story, sometimes I'm hesitant to mention the fact that I've been divorced, because there really still, unfortunately, is a stigma surrounding it. Sometimes people are going to think that maybe you give up too easily, or that you misbehaved somehow in your marriage. So unfortunately, there can still be a stigma. And then finally, one of the other expectations is people think that divorce is kind of this contained thing. They think all it is just the end of a marriage, and it's going to impact that part of your life and nothing else. The reality is, though, divorce is way, way bigger than that. It really doesn't leave anything untouched. So just know that. Be prepared for everything to change, and also be prepared for things to continue to get better afterwards. So there you have it, divorce, expectations versus reality.